So I got this letter from the Hoa. I think it was a Tuesday, maybe Monday. Maya had soccer practice that night, so honestly, the days just kind of blend together into one big loop of laundry and scheduling. The Hoa was complaining about the mulch in my front garden. Apparently, the mahogany shade I picked was too dark for the neighborhood guidelines. I just stared at the letter for a while, wondering who actually has the time to drive around with a color swatch and judge people's mulch. I basically spend my whole life doing that for other people. An interior designer, so I mostly just curate perfect lives for wealthy families in Columbus. My afternoons are usually spent arguing with contractors about crown molding or trying to convince some woman who makes way more than I do that a navy blue accent wall will make her living room feel grounded. I'm good at it. I know how to make a place feel warm and intentional. My own house. It feels like a hotel where I'm the only staff member. Mark had been home for maybe 20 minutes. He was in the kitchen, leaning against the counter, just scrolling through his phone while the coffee brewed. He didn't even look up when I walked in. Didn't ask about my meeting with the Gables or if ID fixed the lighting in their foyer. He just shifted his weight, his shoulder brushing past me, like I was just a piece of furniture. He had to move around to get to the sugar. I noticed a smudge on the granite that wouldn't come off, which was just adding to my mood. Did you see the Hoa letter? I asked. He didn't look up. The mulch, they say it's too dark. Just fix it, he said. His voice was totally flat. That's the tone he uses when he's thinking about his 401k or some quarterly report. Whatever they want, just make it go away. I stood there for a minute holding my bag, looking at the back of his neck. I don't know when we stopped actually talking and started just exchanging data. Like, Woo's picking up the dry cleaning, when the plumber is coming, tuition stuff. We didn't really speak. I had this cold feeling in my stomach. Not like a scream, just this heavy, quiet kind of anger. I've spent 15 years building this. I changed my career to be flexible for his promotions. I handled the social calendar, the holiday cards, all the birthday parties for kids who barely noticed when I walked into the room. In the one who remembers his mom likes a specific lemon tea and that the vac filter needs changing every 90 days. I'm just the engine in the background. Essential, I guess, but completely ignored. After Mark left for a conference call, I decided to organize the office. It's technically his room, but I'm the one who keeps it from becoming a graveyard of old cables and tax returns. I started with the filing cabinet, pulling out folders from like 2018. I was looking for the dishwasher warranty. I was sure he put it in the home maintenance folder, which, by the way, was mostly just full of dead AA batteries and old rubber bands. Mark won't throw away batteries because he insists he can test them by touching them to his tongue, which is just gross and pointless. I spent 5 minutes just pushing the batteries to the side of the drawer. It felt weird just being this irritated over some metal cylinders, but whatever. Anyway, I kept searching. I remembered this trip we took to the coast way back. I think it was August. Or maybe September, because the air was getting crisp and Maya wasn't even born yet. We stayed in this tiny cottage that smelled like salt and old wood. Mark actually looked at me then, like really looked at me, and said he loved how I could see the potential in everything. He said I had a gift for seeing what something could be. I wondered if he still saw that, or if I was just the person who handles the Hoa now. As I was digging through the bottom drawer, my hand hit something that wasn't a folder. It was a small black faux leather box tucked behind some old insurance policies. It wasn't mine. I don't buy faux leather, it's just ugly. I pulled it out slowly. It was heavy with a little silver latch. I didn't feel my heart racing or anything. I was just curious. Mark isn't really secretive, he's just indifferent. He doesn't hide things to be calculating, he just doesn't think I'd care enough to look. I sat right there on the office floor, the carpet scratching my legs, and opened it. It wasn't jewelry or a letter. There were 3 burner phones, cheap plastic models, and a stack of handwritten notes on Hotel Stationery Hyatt Regency in downtown Cincinnati. I picked up one of the phones. It was dead. I found the charger in the desk drawer and plugged it in. My movements felt mechanical. I wasn't having a breakdown. I didn't cry. I just felt this strange clinical detachment. It was like I was designing a room for a client I didn't really like. I was just looking at the layout of the disaster. While the phone charged, I read the notes. They weren't love letters. They were just logistics. Dates, times, room numbers. Short things like same time next month and she suspects nothing. The she was me. I leaned my head back against the mahogany desk, the same color as the mulch. I thought about the last 3 years. Those business trips to Cincinnati every month. The way he'd come home and go straight to the shower, complaining about the hotel AC. And I'd just welcome him back with a home-cooked meal and a smile, because that was my job. I was the stable one. I kept things running. The phone screen flickered on. There were messages. Hundreds of them. It wasn't just one woman, it was like a rotation. A collection of distractions. He hadn't just been cheating, he'd been managing a second life with the same corporate efficiency he uses for his 401k. I stayed on the floor for a long time. I could hear Mark's voice from the other room, probably telling a coworker that the quarterly projections looked promising. I didn't scream. I didn't run in there and throw the box at him. I just sat there and thought about the mulch. I thought about how I'd spent my whole adult life making sure everything looked seamless from the outside, making sure every edge was trimmed and the colors matched. I put the phones back in the box and slid it behind the insurance policies, exactly where I found it. I stood up and brushed the dust off my slacks. Then I went into the kitchen and started the dishwasher on the high heat setting. I didn't know what I was going to do yet, but I felt awake. The dishwasher finished its cycle with a loud, metallic thud that echoed through the kitchen. I stood there for a moment, listening to the silence that followed, the kind of silence that only exists in a house where two people have stopped knowing how to talk to each other. I didn't open the door right away. I just watched a small drip of water slide down the stainless steel surface. Mark walked into the kitchen around 6:30. He was loosening his tie, his expression that same mask of mild exhaustion he wore every day. He didn't see the look on my face, or maybe he just didn't care to analyze it. He went straight for the fridge, grabbing a sparkling water from the door. "Maya's at Sarah's until 8, he said, not looking at me. "Did you remember to sign the permission slip for the field trip?" I didn't answer. I just leaned against the counter, my arms crossed. I wondered if he could tell that I had spent the last 2 hours sitting on the office floor. I wondered if the secret in the black faux leather box was radiating off me like a scent. "Mark," I said. My voice sounded thinner than I wanted it to. "Yeah?" He popped the tab on the can. I was in the office. I was looking for the dishwasher warranty. He paused the can halfway to his mouth. He didn't freeze, he wasn't that kind of liar. He just slowed down. "And I found a box with phones and notes from the Hyatt Regency." He didn't blink. He didn't drop the can. He just took a slow sip of the water, swallowed, and then looked at me with a look of genuine, misplaced concern. It was the look he used when Maya had a fever, or when a client was having a panic attack over a shade of beige. It was a look of pity. What are you talking about?" "The burner phones, Mark, the notes, she suspects nothing. I think that refers to me," he sighed. It wasn't a sigh of guilt, it was a sigh of annoyance, like I had just asked him to take out the trash when he was already tired. He set the can down on the granite counter with a soft clink. "I don't know what you're talking about. I might have some old work phones in there. We had those security protocols for the merger last year. Remember? We had to use encrypted devices. Encrypted devices don't usually come with handwritten notes about room numbers in Cincinnati," I said. He stepped closer, his voice dropping into that low, soothing register he used to calm people down. "You've been under a lot of stress lately, Emily. The HOA thing, the Gables project. You're spiraling. You're imagining things and connecting dots that aren't there. It's actually a bit worrying." I stared at him. The gaslighting was so seamless it was almost impressive. He wasn't shouting, he wasn't even defensive. He was treating me like I was mentally fragile. He was repositioning the reality of the room so that I was the problem, and he was the stable, concerned husband. For a second, I actually felt a flicker of doubt. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe I had misread the notes. But then I remembered the "she suspects nothing" line. You don't write that in a security protocol for a corporate merger. "I'm not spiraling, Mark. You're acting like you're spiraling," he countered. He reached out to touch my shoulder, but I stepped back. He let his hand drop, his expression shifting from concern to a slight cold disappointment. "Look, if you're feeling this insecure, maybe we should talk about your workload. Maybe you should take a few weeks off. You're getting obsessive." He didn't apologize. He didn't deny the phones specifically, he just shifted the conversation to my mental health. He turned around and walked out of the room, leaving me alone with the smell of lemon-scented detergent and the lingering chill of his voice. He didn't even finish his sparkling water. I spent the next hour staring at the ceiling of our bedroom, listening to the muffled sounds of the neighborhood. I could hear a dog barking 3 houses down and the distant hum of a leaf blower. Someone in this cul-de-sac was obsessing over their lawn again. I realized then that I couldn't trust a single word that came out of his mouth. But I could trust numbers. Mark loved numbers. He lived for them. His 401k, his spreadsheets, his quarterly projection those were the only things he ever treated with any real honesty. I waited until he went to the gym. He goes every Tuesday and Thursday, or maybe it was Wednesday. And Friday I can't. Remember, because he changes his schedule whenever his boss wants a late meeting. Regardless, he was gone for 90 minutes. I went back into the office. I didn't go for the box this time. I went for the computer. I was looking for his secondary password list. I knew he kept a physical copy because he's old-fashioned about his digital security, ironically. I started searching through the top drawer of the mahogany desk. As I was digging, I realized the drawer was sticking again. I had told him 6 months ago that the glide was bent, but he just told me to pull it harder. I spent a good 3 minutes fighting with the drawer, tugging at it with a level of frustration that felt completely disproportionate to the situation. I actually found myself cursing at the piece of wood, wondering why I had helped him pick this specific desk in the first place. It was a beautiful piece of furniture, but the engineering was garbage. Anyway, once I finally yanked the drawer open with a loud crack, I found a small leather notebook tucked under a stack of old tax returns. I took the notebook and my laptop into the guest room, locking the door behind me. My hands weren't shaking. I felt a strange clinical calm, the same feeling I get when I'm staring at a room that's completely wrong, too much red, too little light, a layout that makes no sense. I just needed to strip everything back to the studs and see what was actually holding the structure up. I logged into our joint checking account first. Everything looked normal. The mortgage, the utilities, the target runs for Maya's school supplies. But then I went deeper. I looked at the transfers. There were monthly withdrawals of 1,200. They were labeled as consulting fees LP. I searched our records for anyone with the initials LP. Nothing. No one in his professional network, no one in our social circle. Why 200 a month for 3 years? That was over $40,000. I felt a sudden sharp pressure in my chest. It wasn't heartbreak, it was the feeling of being cheated out of a budget. As an interior designer, I deal with budgets every day. I know how to make $1,000 look like 10,000. And I know when someone is skimming off the top of a project. Mark was skimming off our life. I started digging into his 401k and the secondary savings account he managed. I found another account I didn't even know existed. It was a high-yield savings account in his name only. The balance was staggering. It wasn't just the consulting fees, he'd been diverting a percentage of his bonuses into this account for years. I sat back in the guest room chair, the fabric scratching the back of my neck. I thought about all the times I'd suggested we save for a bigger vacation or suggested we put more into Maya's college fund. I remembered a conversation we had, I think it was about 4 years ago, maybe during a trip to the lake where he told me we needed to tighten our belts because the market was volatile. I had actually cut back on my own professional development courses to help stabilize the household. He had called me the stable one. He had relied on my predictability. I wondered who LP was. A mistress? A series of mistresses? Or maybe something else entirely. The notes from the Hyatt had been logistical, not romantic. Same time next month, she suspects nothing. It sounded like a business arrangement. I spent the next few days playing the part. I smiled at dinner. I asked him about his day. I even thanked him for the concern regarding my stress levels. I watched him carefully, noticing things I had ignored for a decade. I noticed how he checked his phone every time it vibrated, even during dinner. I noticed how he would leave the room to take work calls that lasted exactly 20 minutes. I felt like I was observing a stranger. He wasn't the man I had married, he was a performance. He had spent years curating a version of himself that fit perfectly into our suburban life, just as I had curated our home to fit the HOA guidelines. We were both just managing aesthetics. On Friday, I went to Target. I needed new sponges and some laundry detergent, but I spent an hour just walking the aisles looking at the people. I saw a woman arguing with her husband about which brand of paper towels to buy. I saw a father trying to stop his toddler from throwing a tantrum in the toy section. They looked so normal, so boring. I wondered if they were all hiding burner phones in their desk drawers. I wondered if every stable marriage in our neighborhood was just a series of well-managed lies and diverted funds. When I got home, Mark was in the driveway, washing his car. He looked happy. He looked like the perfect Ohio husband. "Hey, honey," he called out, waving a soapy sponge. "I was thinking about taking us to that new steakhouse in downtown Columbus this weekend. Just the two of us. I think it would be good for you to relax." I looked at him. And for the first time in 15 years, I didn't feel the need to make the moment feel warm or intentional. I didn't feel the need to fix the energy in the room. "That sounds lovely, Mark," I said. I walked past him into the house, my footsteps heavy on the concrete. As I entered the kitchen, I noticed a small smudge of dirt on the white baseboards that I had missed during my last cleaning. I stared at it for a long time, but I didn't get the spray bottle. I just left it there. Mark suggested this fancy steakhouse for dinner. I could tell he was just trying to fix things. He knew the place, one of those spots in downtown Columbus, with dim lighting and an expensive wine list. He probably thought a few ribeyes and a bottle of Cabernet would just reset everything. He wanted me to go back to being the quiet, supportive wife who didn't ask questions about random leather boxes. I spent the rest of Friday just, I don't know, going through the motions. I helped Maya with her pre-algebra, but she was mostly just staring at her phone. She's 14, so her whole life is basically encrypted messages and eye rolls. For the first time, I actually felt for her. We were both keeping secrets in that house. Mark spent an hour in the garage organizing his tools. I could hear him clinking wrenches and moving plastic bins around. It used to be a sound that meant he was being productive, taking care of things. Now it just sounded like noise. I wondered if he was thinking about dinner, or if he was thinking about those consulting fees he'd been paying for 3 years. Saturday morning was gray standard Ohio weather. It looked like it would rain, but it never did. Mark took Maya to a volleyball tournament in Dayton, which gave me about 6 hours to myself. The house felt different with them gone. Not empty exactly. It just felt like a crime scene I was finally allowed to look at. I went straight to the guest room and opened the laptop. I had the notebook from the desk and the passwords. I didn't even start with the emails, I went for the cloud storage first, because Mark saves everything. He has a digital archive for every single phase of his life: college, his first job in Chicago, the early years of our marriage. I searched for LP again, but I looked for folders this time, not just transactions. I found a hidden directory. It was password protected, and it took me 3 tries with the combinations in his notebook before it actually opened. It wasn't documents or spreadsheets. It was a folder of photos. There were hundreds of them. Not the kind of stuff you usually find in an affair folderno, grainy hotel selfies, or anything like that. They were just lifestyle photos. Mark and a woman named Laura Price. I knew her name because she was tagged in a few of the social media screenshots. They were in places I'd never been: a bistro in Quebec, a hiking trail in the Blue Ridge Mountains, a gallery in New York. In the photos, Mark looked different. He wasn't wearing the suburban dad outfit of pleated khakis and polos. He had on slim-fit blazers and dark jeans, and he had this look of genuine attention. He was looking at her the way he used to look at me before we had the mortgage and the HOA and all the school fundraisers. But the way she looked was what really got to me. Laura Price was an architect. I remembered seeing her name in a trade magazine a few years ago. She looked sharp, modern, and just. Unapologetic. In the photos, she wasn't the stable one. She wasn't the one managing the schedule or making sure the house was clean. She was the spark. Mark wasn't the leader in those pictures, he was just the admirer. I felt a sudden wave of nausea. It wasn't just the cheating. It was that he'd basically created a second version of himself, someone lighter and more adventurous. He hadn't just found another woman, he'd found another identity. He used our actual life as the boring anchor that let him sail away every few weeks. I tried to print some of the photos. I wanted something physical to hold on to, something he couldn't just remotely wipe from the drive. But the printer started acting up. The paper kept jamming, leaving these jagged, crumpled strips sticking out of the machine. I spent 10 minutes pulling out the scraps, and I got an ink smudge all over my thumb. I've always hated that printer. It's a budget model Mark insisted on because of some efficiency rating, which is just corporate speak for it breaks all the time. I actually found myself shaking the machine, wondering why I ever let him handle the electronics in the house. Anyway, once I cleared the jam, the images finally came out. I held a photo of them in Quebec. They were at a small table with red wine and a cheese plate. Mark was laughing. I can't remember the last time I'd seen him laugh like that, the kind of laugh that actually reaches the eyes. With me, his laughter is always polite. A controlled sound. I sat on the edge of the guest bed with the photos scattered around me. I thought about the last 10 years. All the times I suggested a trip for just the two of us, and he'd say he was too stressed with work or that the timing was wrong for Maya. He wasn't stressed. He was just saving his energy for her. I think it was back in 2019. Wait, was it 2019? No, probably 2020, when everything started shutting down. He told me he had to work from the guest room for a special project that was top secret. I actually brought him tea and snacks. I made sure the house was quiet so he could concentrate. I remember feeling proud of how supportive I was. I thought I was being the perfect partner. In reality, he was probably just coordinating a getaway or managing the payments for Laura Price. The feeling in my chest shifted. The nausea went away, and things just felt cold. I wasn't heartbroken the way I thought I'd be. I didn't want to beg him to stay or ask why her, because the answer was right there. She was the escape. I was the home. And most people spend their whole lives trying to escape home. I spent the next few hours digging into the financial records again, but I looked for patterns. The 1,200 a month wasn't just an allowance. I found transfers to a property management company in Cincinnati. He had an apartment. A small modern condo in the Overtherheim district. He wasn't just visiting hotels, he had a base. He had a second living room, a second bed, and probably a second set of towels that I didn't have to wash. I wondered how many times he'd come home from a business trip and tell me he missed me while her perfume was still on his skin. I wondered if he ever looked at me across the table and compared us like he was weighing two different investment portfolios. The sound of the garage door opening snapped me out of it. I had about 5 minutes before they walked in. I moved fast. I shut down the laptop, cleared the history, and gathered the photos. I didn't put them in the office. I put them in a folder and tucked them inside my own professional portfolio in the hallway closet, hidden behind some fabric swatches from a project I finished 3 years ago. When I walked into the kitchen, Mark and Maya were coming in. Maya looked exhausted, her hair a mess from her ponytail, clutching a Gatorade. Mark looked energized. He was talking about the game, his voice loud. "We almost took the lead in the second set," he said, tossing his keys on the counter. Maya had this incredible serve that just caught the other girl off guard. He looked at me and smiled. It was that same smile, the one that used to make me feel safe, but now just looked like a mask. "You okay, Em? You look a little pale," he said. "Just a headache," I told him. My voice was flat but steady. "The weather's been weird. Well, get some aspirin. We're still on for dinner, right? 7 o'clock. I already made the reservation. "It'll be ready," I said. I watched him walk away to help Maya with her gear. I noticed a small smudge on his shoe, maybe mud from the courts or maybe something else. I didn't feel the urge to tell him. I didn't feel the urge to fix anything. I spent the next 2 hours getting ready. I chose a charcoal dress. It was a professional color, but it felt like armor. I spent a long time on my makeup, making sure I looked neutral. I wanted to look exactly like the woman he expected, the stable, predictable engine of his life. While I was doing my hair, I caught my reflection. I looked 40. I looked like a woman who had spent 15 years polishing the edges of someone else's life. I thought about the architect in the photos. I realized I didn't even hate her. In a weird way, I felt a kinship with her. We were both just different versions of a project Mark was managing. She was the luxury renovation, I was the structural foundation. And the thing about foundations is that once they start to crack, the whole building becomes unstable. As I put on my earrings, I remembered a conversation from early in our marriage. Third anniversary. Or maybe the fourth. We'd gone to a seafood place. He told me he loved how I could make any space feel like a sanctuary. He said he never had to worry about anything when he came home, because I had everything under control. At the time, I thought it was a compliment. Now I realize he just liked the fact that I made his life so easy that he had the mental space to build another one. I walked downstairs just as Mark was finishing a drink. He paused, scanning my dress. "You look great, Emily," he said. "Thank you," I replied. He reached out to take my hand, and for a second I felt a surge of revulsion. I wanted to pull away or scream or throw the photos of the Cincinnati condo in his face. But I didn't. I let him take my hand. I let him lead me to the car. As we walked out, I noticed a small weed poking through the mahogany mulch in the garden. It was a tiny, stubborn thing, green and jagged. I didn't pull it out. I just left it there. The drive to downtown Columbus was quiet. Mark talked about quarterly projections and a potential promotion. He sounded so confident. I just nodded and hummed in the right places, watching his fingers on the steering wheel. I wondered if he knew the dynamic had shifted. If he could tell that the woman in the passenger seat wasn't the same one would welcomed him home for the last 15 years. We got to the steakhouse, and they put us in a booth in the back, where it was dark and the other diners were just a hum in the background. The waiter brought wine, and Mark poured 2 glasses. To us, he said, raising his glass. And to getting back on the same page, I looked at the wine. I thought about the consulting fees and the high-yield account and the apartment in Cincinnati. To us, I said, and I took a sip. The wine was tart and cold. I didn't know exactly what my next move was, but looking at Mark, I realized I wasn't the one spiraling. He was the one living in a house of cards, and I was the only one who knew where the first card needed to be pulled. I spent the rest of the dinner asking him about work, watching him lie with this effortless grace. He was so good at it that it almost felt like a performance. I just sat there, sipping my wine and making a mental list of everything I needed to secure before he realized I'd found the notebook. When the check came, he paid with the corporate card. I wasn't surprised. He was skimming from everyone. As we walked back to the car, the air was chilly, and I felt a sudden craving for something simple. On the way home, I asked him to stop at a 24-hour drugstore. "What do you need?" he asked, sounding slightly annoyed. "Just some more light bulbs for the hallway," I said. "One of them flickered today." He sighed and pulled into the parking lot. While he waited in the car, I walked through the aisles under the humming fluorescent lights. I didn't buy any light bulbs. Instead, I bought a small handheld voice recorder and a pack of envelopes. I walked back to the car with the small plastic bag. Mark didn't ask what I bought. He just started the engine and drove us back toward the cul-de-sac, toward the house with the dark mulch and the broken printer. As we pulled into the driveway, I looked at the place. It looked perfect from the outside. The lawn was trimmed, the siding was clean. It was a masterpiece of suburban design. I just wondered how long it would take for the neighbors to notice when the walls finally started to come down. So Sunday morning comes, and it's just the usual routine. Coffee in the kitchen, sun coming through the blinds. Mark was actually in a great mood. humming some song I didn't know while he made pancakes for Maya. He looked at me and smiled that same look. He always hasn't asked if I wanted some berries from the fridge. Yes, please, I said. I just watched him move around. He was so efficient, so coordinated. It was weird, honestly. Just realizing that the man I've been in bed with for 15 years is basically just a really good actor. He wasn't just lying about the other woman, or the money. It was like his whole presence in the house was a lie. Our marriage was just something that ran in the background, like a dishwasher, while he put all his actual energy somewhere else. I didn't want to scream or throw things. I just felt this deep exhaustion, like it was in my bones. I wondered how many other people in our neighborhood were sitting there eating pancakes and smiling while thinking about how to ruin their spouse. After breakfast, Mark took Maya to a farmer's market. He said he wanted some organic honey and sourdough. I told him to take his time. As soon as the garage door shut and the SUV pulled away, I stopped pretending. I spent the first hour just sitting there. I was kind of paralyzed. I just sat at the kitchen table staring at a pancake crumb, wondering where to even start. I had the photos, the account numbers. I knew what he'd done. But I didn't have a plan. I'm an interior designer. I know how to pick a shade of gray for a living room, but I have no idea how to dismantle a marriage without ending up broke or homeless. My dishwasher had been making this weird grinding sound for a week, and it was driving me crazy, but I didn't even have the energy to call someone. I realized I needed a lawyer. Not a therapist, but a real lawyer with a big desk and a high hourly rate. I spent a few hours on my laptop looking for divorce attorneys in Columbus. I didn't want some celebrity lawyer with a billboard that says, "Get what you deserve." I wanted someone quiet. Someone who handled high-asset divorces and knew how to find hidden money. I wanted someone who sounded cold and maybe a little bit bored. I found Sarah Jenkins. Her website was almost empty. No stock photos of happy families or gavels. Just a list of where she went to school, and a note that she focused on complex matrimonial assets. Her office was in those boring professional buildings near Short North, where you can just blend in. I called her at 11:00. My voice was steady, which was weird. "I'm looking for a consultation," I told her. "I think my husband has been moving marital assets into separate accounts. I have some evidence, but I need a strategy." Sarah didn't gasp or say she was sorry. She just asked what he did for a living, and roughly how much the household was worth. "He's in corporate finance," I said. "The net worth is complicated. He manages the accounts." "That's common," she said. Her voice was dry, like parchment. "I have an opening Tuesday at 2. Can you make it?" "Yes," I said. "I can." I hung up and looked around my kitchen. I noticed the hinge on the upper cabinet one with the glassware was sagging again. It's been doing that for months. Every time you open it, the door tilts and you have to push it back. I spent 15 minutes trying to fix it with a screwdriver from the junk drawer, but I just stripped the screw. I stood there for a minute, looking at the crooked door, and got suddenly really angry. I've spent so much time making sure every little thing in this house was perfect, and this one stupid hinge wouldn't work. I eventually just gave up and shut it. It stayed crooked. The rest of the weekend was just a performance. I was polite. I was helpful. I listened to Mark complain about some manager at his firm who couldn't figure out a pivot table. I even laughed at his jokes. I felt like I was watching a movie of my own life from a distance. On Tuesday, I told him I was meeting a client downtown. He didn't even look up from his tablet. "Cool, you'll be home by 6. I was thinking Thai food," he said. "I should be," I told him. I drove to Sarah's office with a folder of photos and a list of account numbers. Traffic on I-71 was a nightmare. Just a long line of gray cars and brake lights. I remember thinking about how many people in those cars were also driving towards some secret that was going to blow up their lives. Sarah's office was exactly what I expected. Beige walls, expensive chair, view of a parking lot. She didn't shake my hand. She just pointed to a seat and opened a legal pad. "Tell me everything," she said, "and give me the boring parts." That's usually where the money is. I spent 90 minutes going through it all. The burner phones, the Hyatt notes, the 1,100 monthly consulting fees. And the condo in Cincinnati. I showed her the photos of Laura Price. Sarah didn't react to the cheating. To her, the mistress was just a lead. The cheating is a secondary issue for the court, she said, writing something down. But spending joint funds on a second household? That's dissipation of marital assets. Basically, he's spending your money. We can argue for a bigger share of what's left to make up for it. I just don't want to be left with nothing, I said. He controls everything, the 401k, the savings. I've just been the one signing the permission slips. Sarah looked at me over her glasses. That's why we don't tell him. Not yet. If he knows, he'll move the money to offshore accounts or hide it better. For a few weeks, you're the perfect wife. While he thinks he can lean on you, we're going to pull the supports out from under him. I felt this cold thrill in my chest. It wasn't happiness, it was just a plan. Like when I finally get a room layout right, and everything fits where it's supposed to. What now? I asked. I'm hiring a forensic accountant, Sarah said. They'll go through every transaction from the last 5 years. In the meantime, document everything. Business trips, weird calls, stories that don't add up. Keep a log. Digital, password protected. And for God's sake, don't use a shared computer. I left feeling lighter, but my head was pounding. I stopped at Starbucks and got a cake pop that tasted like pure sugar and chemicals. I sat in my car for 10 minutes eating it, wondering if people could tell I was planning the financial execution of my husband. When I got home, the house was quiet. Maya was at a friend's and Mark wasn't back yet. I went into the guest room, opened my laptop, and started a document called Project Reconstruction. I started listing things. Not just money, but the years. Like back in 2016, or maybe 2017, when we had that big fight about my career. I wanted to take a sustainable architecture course in Italy. I had the portfolio and everything. Mark told me it was selfish to leave Maya for 3 months. He said the family needed stability. I believed him. I withdrew the application and spent those 3 months redesigning our guest bathroom instead. As I typed, I realized that my stability was actually his biggest asset. He wasn't just cheating with another woman, he was using my desire to be a good mother and wife as a shield. The next few weeks, I just noticed things. I noticed how he'd check the time when he talked to me, like he was on a countdown. I noticed him touching his phone even when it wasn't ringing. I stayed polite. I stayed stable. You seem different lately, Mark said one night. We were on the patio, watching the sunset over the hedges. More quiet, you still stressed. I'm actually feeling much better, I said, smiling. I think the routine is just helping. He looked satisfied. He believed me. He thought I was exactly where he wanted me. I started spending more time at Target. I didn't need anything, I just liked the noise. The bright lights and the people talking drowned out my own thoughts. I'd walk through the home decor section, looking at overpriced candles, and think about that condo in Cincinnati. I wondered if Laura Price liked the same stuff I did. One afternoon, I found a bag of pasta in the pantry that had expired 2 years ago. I just stared at it. I thought about how many expired things I'd been clinging to in this marriage. I threw the pasta out and scrubbed the shelves with bleach. I wanted everything sterile. I wanted the house so clean that when things finally exploded, there would be nothing left to save. The forensic accountant, Marcus, who sounded like he'd never smiled in his life, sent the preliminary report 3 weeks later. I read it in the guest room with the door locked. It was way worse than I thought. The 1,200 was nothing. There were travel expenses billed to his firm for luxury hotels in cities he had no reason to visit. A car lease he'd never seen. Transfers to an investment account in Laura Price's name. He hadn't just been skimming, he'd been draining our future to pay for a second life. I felt this cold rage, but not the kind where you break things. It was the kind that makes you precise. I didn't just want to leave, I wanted him to feel the exact moment the floor gave way. I sent the report to Sarah. We have enough, she told me. But I want to wait, I want him to feel completely secure right up until the moment he's served. I can do that, I said. That night, Mark came home with lilies. Expensive ones. They smelled way too sweet, almost like a funeral, just because, he said, kissing my cheek. I appreciate everything you do, You're the rock of this house. I looked at the lilies and then at him. I actually felt sorry for him. He thought flowers were enough to pay for 15 years of lies. Thank you, Mark, I said. They're beautiful. I put them in a vase. The water was cloudy, so I emptied it and refilled it with fresh, cold water. I spent a long time adjusting the stems so they were balanced. I thought about what Sarah called the sovereign Maveth moment of filing. The moment I stopped being part of his project and started my own. I wondered what Maya would think. She's 14 and she's not blind. She'd noticed the tension. I just hoped she'd see that it was possible to be broken and strategic at the same time. The following Monday, the HOA emailed about a neighborhood beautification project. They wanted the mulch fresh and the edges crisp by the first of the month. I just deleted the email. I didn't care about the mulch. I went into the hallway closet and looked at my portfolio. I saw the photos of Mark and Laura in Quebec looking happy. I realized I didn't even hate Laura. She was just another person Mark was managing. He probably told her I was some cold, distant wife. He played both of us. I closed the portfolio and put it back. That evening, Mark suggested we take Maya to a movie. He was in a great mood, talking about some new investment opportunity. He sounded so sure of himself. I just nodded and hummed in the right places. I watched him navigate the world with that confidence of a man who thinks he's the smartest person in the room. As we walked to the car, I noticed a small weed growing through the mulch in the garden. It had a few more leaves now, just stretching up through the mahogany chips. It was out of place. I looked at it and smiled. I didn't pull it out. We drove toward downtown. Mark was talking about the movie some historical drama, but I wasn't listening. I was thinking about the files in Sarah's office and the look on his face when he'd realized the stable wife had spent the last month dismantling his life. "Are you okay, honey?" he asked. "You're very quiet." "I'm just thinking about the house," I lied. "I think it's time for some renovations. We need to tear a few things down to make room for something new." Mark laughed. "As long as it's within the HOA guidelines." "Oh, don't worry," I said, looking out the window. "I'm planning something the HOA won't see coming." I leaned back and closed my eyes. I could almost feel the old life cracking. It was terrifying, but for the first time in a long time, I felt awake. At the theater, Mark held the door for me and Maya. He looked like the perfect dad, the perfect husband. A masterpiece. I stood there for a second and wondered how long it takes for a masterpiece to crumble once the foundation is gone. As the movie started, I felt the voice recorder in my pocket. I hadn't even turned it on. I didn't need to. The numbers and the audit were enough. I sat in the dark and felt a strange sense of peace. I wasn't the one spiraling anymore. I had the map. The movie ended and we walked back to the car. Mark was analyzing the characters' motivations with his usual detachment. He didn't notice that I wasn't responding. As we pulled into the driveway of our perfect house, I looked at the white siding and the lawn. I thought about the crooked cabinet hinge and the expired pasta. I realized I didn't want to fix any of it. I wanted to let it all fall apart. "I'm going to head up to bed," I said as we walked inside. "I have an early start tomorrow." "Good night, he said, kissing my forehead. "Good night, Mark," I replied. I walked up the stairs and went into the guest room. I locked the door and sat on the edge of the bed. I looked at the laptop and the folder in the closet. I was 40 years old, and I didn't know what tomorrow looked like. But for the first time in 15 years, I didn't feel the need to plan it. I just sat there in the silence, listening to a dog barking a few houses down, and waited.